I'm Todd Zwillick, and it's the Friday News Roundup here on 1A. Well, we are in the final weeks of election season. Both candidates are, contrary to their stated desires, ramping up the heat. Some new polling from NPR shows that this season is looking like, yes, it's going to be a squeaker. And federal authorities seem to have foiled an election day terrorist plot. A lot of news this week, and joining us for all of it, our fabulous panel, Steve Clemons is the founding editor at the Washington Note and is here with me in the studio. Hi, Steve.
Hey, great to see you.
Great to have you. Also with us, you know the voice, Zoe Clark, political director at Michigan Public and host of It's Just Politics. Zoe, always great to have you.
Todd, so good to be here.
So glad you're here with us from Washington. Another voice that you know, Anita Kumar, senior managing editor at Politico. Anita, great to have you.
Great to be back.
We're all chirping this morning, and it's good because we have a lot to get to. It has been busy in our worlds. Let's start with probably the biggest interview of the week. Vice President and Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris. She sat down with Bret Baier of Fox News. It seemed at times like she struggled to get a word in.
Bret, let's just get to the point. Okay, the point is that we have a broken immigration system that needs to be repaired.
So your Homeland Security Secretary said that 85% of apprehensions.
I'm not finished. We have an
rough estimate of 6 million people have been released into the country. And let me just finish. I'll get to the question. I promise you.
I was beginning to answer.
All right, let's just go around the room because everybody has a take on this one. Anita, you go first. What do you think viewers took away from that confrontation?
Well, I think it depends on who your viewer was, right? I think the Republicans looked at that and saw, hey, she had a tough interview. Bret Baier asked her all the things they wanted to hear, largely immigration. I think you're a Democrat, you're a Harris supporter. You saw her push back and tried to get in, a word edgewise, say what she wanted to say and showed that she was kind of tough. So one of those things where you're kind of looking at it and you can see what you want to see.
Zoe, I thought that Kamala Harris was there largely to take away objections from moderates, Republicans, Fox News viewers who don't like Donald Trump, but they're just not sure if they can vote for Kamala Harris. I've never voted for a Democrat before. And that's why she was there, to overcome objections. I don't know if you agree with that, but if that's the premise and you'll grant it to me, how do you think it went?
I will grant it, and so will the 7.8 million viewers, according to Nielsen, who watched it. I mean, as Anita said, it's a Rorschach test, right? For Republicans on the far right, they're saying that it was a disaster, quote unquote. Democrats are saying, no, she walked into the lion's den, showed she was strong and, ready and willing to take on the fight. But to your point, there are Nikki Haley voters. And it's this interesting thing that we are now seeing the Harris campaign do in now the next 17 days, which is one, get out the vote. Enthusiasm. Got to get people up from the couch and out to vote. And two, looking at these moderate Republicans who she's thinking, the campaign is thinking possibly, can you get enough in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania to actually move the needle?
Steve, partisans are going to partisan in their evaluation of the Fox News interview, as Zoe suggested. What did you see when you watched that?
Look, I think she gets credit for, as Zoe said, walking into the lion's den. Everyone knew it was going to be a tough interview. Bret Baier played the role of Fox News more than I thought he would.
Me too.
Particularly about the comments about Donald Trump saying he was not going to hurt anyone, and bringing that from an interview where she definitely knew right away, hey, you're not serious, are you? You know what he's saying. He's talking about enemy within. He's talking about deploying the military against his enemies and jailing his enemies. I thought she did a superb job of pivoting. And I think people will see Fox News was Fox News and she was Kamala Harris walking in and meeting that challenge in a way. And so I think that collision needed to happen. And while both sides may have that side, with those people who want to see bravery and someone coming in to kind of deal with their opposition, I think she gets points for that.
Yeah, I'll just repeat. I very much view this interview as an exercise in reaching, as Zoe said, moderates, Republicans who just, vote for a Democrat? Are you serious? I don't want to vote for Trump. I need to see her as presidential. Show me something. Maybe she did. I think that's why she was there. And if you haven't seen it, go back and watch it on YouTube and ask yourself if she accomplished that. Well, that interview aside, Kamala Harris has definitely gotten more aggressive in her attacks on Donald Trump and former president, GOP candidate. On Monday, she unveiled a video. This was in Erie, Pennsylvania at her rally. She kind of said, let's go to the tape. It shows Donald Trump is, quote, increasingly unstable and unhinged, in her words.
Please roll the clip.
The worst people are the enemies from within. The enemy from within. Those people are more dangerous, the enemy from within, than Russia and China. These people should be put in jail the way they talk about our judges and our justices. Now, if you had one really violent day, one rough hour, and I mean real rough. I think the bigger problem are the people from within. We have some very bad people. We have some sick people, radical left lunatics. And I think they're the big, and it should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military.
Well, Anita, I think part of the point there is that Donald Trump's own words repeatedly speak for themselves. What about the strategy? What about Kamala Harris saying, let's go to the tape and playing this over and over?
Well, it seems like the crowd loved the let's go to the tape, right? They loved and hated it. It is a different strategy for her. And I think we've seen it in the last couple weeks where she's talking a bit more about things that Joe Biden did. This is something Joe Biden talked about all the time. We haven't heard her talk about it as much. She's trying to talk about some of the issues. She did spend half that rally or that speech talking about some of the issues. But I do think it's probably because Trump himself has upped the rhetoric, right? We've heard him talk like this before on the campaign trail in prior elections. We've heard him talk about it the last year. But I do think in the last few days, we've heard a little bit more from him. That line about the National Guard and the military, that was pretty different, upped it a little bit more there. And it's not just her comments. They've also released a new ad, The Enemy Within, talking about those comments. They have two former national security aides from Donald Trump's time in office talking about how scared they are. And they also have, sort of a video out. So they are really leaning into this. And I think it's something that they feel like they can do at this point because it's really close and they've got to do something. And he's upped that rhetoric as well.
Steve?
I think it's like Roy Cohn's ghost is sitting on Donald Trump's shoulder. This is McCarthyism. This is, if you remember the days we were talking about the enemy within, then it was the communist and an enemy within. It's pages out of that book. And I think, and I've talked to people around Kamala Harris who know exactly where this language is coming from and why they have now amped up their critique, because they're basically saying this is an incredibly risky bet for the nation that you would return this person back to power using this kind of language to divide
openly
Americans.
Saying not just that there's an enemy within, which is familiar, but that I will consider turning the military on Americans. Even Joe McCarthy,
yes,
as far as I'm aware, never said that. Well, those are the stakes. We resist talking too much about polling on this show, but sometimes you gotta. We're not completely averse to it. According to NPR polling that came out this week, boy, it's tight. Came out on Wednesday. Georgia and Arizona are now leaning Trump, according to NPR. 5 swing states are true toss-ups: Nevada, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Michigan. Pennsylvania, a toss-up with a slight edge for Kamala Harris. But NPR's analysis does have Kamala Harris winning in their projection by about 7 electoral votes. Doesn't get a whole lot closer than that. Zoe, what are you seeing in those data?
Yeah, well, and I love that that's, this focus, right, for you all, the stakes, not the polls. So when we do talk about polls, I think it's really important to remember what we've always talked about on this show is that we look at the trends, right? Not one poll does a decision make. So let's look at where things were, when Biden was in the race. It was clear that the president was underwater, right, in Michigan, in these swing states. Then July comes around, Harris enters, and there's this bump and this genuine enthusiasm. And there was a lot of, the vibe coverage and Brat Summer. And look, now the polls are trending back to what we sort of knew all along, was that this is going to be a very, very close race in what is a very divided country right now. And going back to what we're talking about, what we know is this is going to be a turnout election, right? If folks turn out, that is good for Kamala Harris. For Donald Trump, he has a low ceiling. And for him, it's trying to get his base out and hoping that Harris voters just don't turn out.
Well, Zoe, while we've got you here, let's linger on Michigan a little bit.
Please.
There's a Senate race there. Elise Slotkin, member of Congress, Mike Rogers, member of Congress, facing off for an open Senate seat there. What's most important about that race now? How close is it?
Yeah, well, aside from it being one of the races that is going to determine the makeup of the U.S. Senate come 2025. It too is incredibly close. Slotkin, by all polling, again, let's talk about the trends, not just one poll, was doing very well earlier in the summer, particularly among independents. Rogers, the Republican, wasn't doing great with Republican base voters, Trump voters, and it too now is tightening. And what's really interesting is they just had their final debate this week. There's actually a debate in this Senate race, which is fabulous, I think. And what you heard Alyssa Slotkin say is, if you are a Republican, you have a home with me. You have a voice with me. Again, something we're hearing Kamala Harris start to do as well.
Steve, I watched part of that debate, and Alyssa Slotkin did another thing. She went in on Mike Rogers' record on reproductive rights and abortion. I think she understands there are a lot of women in Michigan, moderate women, uncomfortable with Dobbs.
Oh, I think that's right. I mean, I think they're basically, this is the part that's, tough in elections. I happen to know former Congressman Mike Rogers pretty well, and I think he feels like that was a mischaracterization, but that's what she's trying to paint.
Of his record, that's what he's told you.
Yes.
Well, it wouldn't be the first time if he feels that way, and we'll see if it sticks. One of the many, many tight Senate races in Michigan, and Michigan overall is tight. Boy, is it important. That's why we call Zoe. We need her here for the Michigan news. We're rounding up all of the week's news in Michigan and beyond. Steve Clemons is here, Zoe Clark, Anita Kumar. Coming up, voting rules are changing in Georgia, where Jimmy Carter has cast his ballot with a record number of early voters, and we're going to catch up with the Trump campaign as well. Plus, that Friday News Roundup quiz. You love it. We'll get to more comments and questions with our guests. I'm Todd Zwillich. You're listening to 1A.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from ProQuest, whose website Black Freedom Struggle in the U.S. curates 2,000 documents related to the fight for civil and human rights. Open to all at proquest.com/go/blackfreedom. And from DuckDuckGo, a privacy company committed to making privacy online simple. Used by tens of millions, they offer private search and tracker blocking with one download. DuckDuckGo, privacy simplified.
I'm Todd Zwillich. Welcome back to the Roundup here on 1A. Now, as you know, each week here on 1A, we love to challenge you with our news quiz. Last Friday, we asked about the Mega Millions lottery. Right now, it costs $2 to play. Next year, it's going to cost you more. Did you know how much more? Lily in San Diego knows. Congratulations. Lily knew the price is going to rise to a whopping $5 to play Mega Millions. Still a lousy investment, by the way. Take it from me. Mega Millions doesn't work to make you rich. Unless lightning strikes. Your 1A swag is on the way, Lily. Here's this week's question. According to Pew Research, the elections of 2018 2020 and 2022 attracted the highest turnout of voters in decades. Here's the question. Which U.S. state in 2020 had the highest turnout rate? Which U.S. state is the nation's leader in democracy? Leave us your answer using the 1A Vox Pop app or visit today's show page at the1a.org. We're accepting entries until midnight on Sunday, so good luck. All right, let's get back to the roundup now. Steve Clemons is here. Anita Clark from Politico, Anita Kumar from Politico, Zoe Clark from Michigan Public, all here. We're covering politics as always. You have to follow the money. And one super PAC called Future Coalition PAC, which is funded by billionaire Elon Musk. He's funneled $75 million into that PAC so far. They're doing a lot. But one thing that they're doing, Steve, is running ads promoting Kamala Harris's support for Israel in Michigan, where Arab and Muslim voters congregate, especially around Dearborn and other places, simultaneously running ads aimed at Jewish voters in Pennsylvania, attacking Harris as promoting anti-Israel policies.
That is what Elon is doing every day on X, formerly known as Twitter, but he's now also helped fund the super PAC that is doing this to inflame voters. Michigan, as Zoe was just saying, is on fragile tenterhooks in many ways. And Dearborn, Michigan, has the largest Arab American population, voting population in the United States. And so there's been significant frustration with the Biden administration, which includes Kamala Harris, for their policy towards Israel and the Gaza crisis and the 40,000 plus deaths that have happened, many women and children that have happened in that case. So yeah, they're inflaming that. You know, one wonders sometime where Elon Musk is trying to become a James Bond villain. Lots of money, lots of platform, lots of power. But clearly, dark money is playing. I think it's beyond Elon Musk. I think we have to ask questions about dark money in general, and maybe on both sides of the aisle. But what role is it playing, and what are we allowing billionaires to do in this democracy?
Well, this is also an Elon Musk story to a large degree. The flood of disinformation about hurricanes Helene and Milton that spread in the last couple of weeks. Former President Donald Trump and his allies, primarily Elon Musk, have made a number of false claims about the federal response to the two hurricanes. These two storms recently devastated parts of the Southeast, killing at least 250 people, and these false claims include conspiracy theories about FEMA and disaster relief. But a handful of Republicans in states directly affected by the hurricanes are pushing back.
There's not going to be anything where FEMA is ever going to be able to keep you from your home. Be careful about the nonsense that gets circulated, and just know that the more titillating it is, the more likely somebody is making money off of it, and they don't really give a damn about the well-being and safety of the people that are actually in the eye of this storm. It's all just trying to monetize what they're doing.
Florida Republican Governor Ron DeSantis at a press conference on Wednesday. Anita, the governor didn't name any names about the primary source of this disinformation. But in the past, it's true, Republicans have been reluctant to speak out against Donald Trump, which I think tacitly, at least, that's what Ron DeSantis was doing there, even if he didn't say the word. What makes these false claims different from all the other ones that seem to fly just fine in GOP circles these days?
Well, you're seeing a lot of Republicans, and you just mentioned a couple of them, right, in these states that are dealing with their constituents, people that don't have power, that don't have homes, that have had flooding, and they are trying to help them. Their offices are trying to help their constituents, and it's just made worse by all this disinformation, people thinking that there is no response or they're not going to get their money, et cetera, et cetera. But you're exactly right. It's interesting to watch this because Republicans in these states are pushing back. They are doing exactly what we just heard in those clips. They're saying, don't believe the false information, but they're not really taking it one step further. You're not hearing them say, look, Donald Trump did this, or so-and-so did this, or Elon Musk did this. They are sort of using this as, it's kind of a balancing act, right? They're pushing back because they feel like they need to do it, but they still don't want to call out Donald Trump as the leader of the party.
The reality, Zoe, is that Donald Trump and Elon Musk both used their gigantic platforms to try to disrupt hurricane recovery. That's what they did. It worked to a large extent in North Carolina and other places. And it seems like a pretty obvious roadmap for election night, too.
Yeah, deliberate, sustained misinformation to create confusion, and then to distrust to rile folks up. It's a playbook, and it's one we have to be ready for.
It's one we have to be aware of, and just know that the roadmap is there. So when election night comes, you'll be a little bit smarter about the information that you see. Well, Donald Trump's false claims about Hurricanes Helene and Milton weren't his only remarks that drew a response this week.
I think the bigger problem is the enemy from within, not even the people that have come in and destroying our country. By the way, totally destroying our country. The towns, the villages, they're being inundated. But I don't think they're the problem in terms of election day. I think the bigger problem are the people from within. We have some very bad people. We have some sick people, radical left lunatics. It should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military.
Donald Trump speaking to Fox News on Sunday. Steve, you mentioned this flourish already and some of its implications, but I want to hover on it a little bit because it's critically important. A United States presidential candidate suggesting the military could be used on American citizens who oppose their candidacy.
And I should say he's already said he has a list of names, specific individuals. Adam Schiff is on that list. Nancy Pelosi and her family are on that list. He's making a Nixon-style enemies list and saying he's going to weaponize the military and National Guard and go after people. This has never happened in our history. It's a remarkable moment, and we should all not be normalizing this moment.
Well,
we
as
should
somebody
be actually listening to what this may mean for the nation.
And that's what I want to ask you about. As somebody who has covered all of this for so very long, I see it in your eyes. This is different. What does it say to you about the stakes of this election?
I think the stakes are huge. You know, I've been someone who likes to keep my powder dry, so to speak, maintain dispassionate distance on both sides. But when you hear rhetoric of this sort, what a former U.S. ambassador working for Donald Trump, Gordon Sondland, said the other day is just hyperbole. How do you know what's hyperbole to Donald Trump and what's actual fact? When you look at January 6th and what unrolled that day, what he was clearly a part of for a point and then tried to disown and now is trying to own again. This kind of statement is very scary. It raises questions that if Donald Trump were to begin to try and enact any of these steps that he has talked about openly in his interviews, do we create an underground? Do we try to create, protect people? I mean, what do we do in the United States with a leader that has decided to go out, make retribution and vengeance a driving, animating force of his administration?
The stakes of the 2024 election from veteran journalist in Washington, Steve Clemons there. Speaking of Donald Trump's trip to Chicago on Tuesday, at an event held by the Economic Club of Chicago, Donald Trump defended his plan to place tariffs on all imports if reelected.
The higher the tariff, the more likely it is to have them come into the country.
The higher the tariff, the more you're going to put on the value of that piece, those goods, the higher people are going to have to pay in shops.
The higher the tariff, the more likely it is that the company will come into the United States and build a factory in the United States so it doesn't have to pay the tariff.
Bloomberg editor, they're not necessarily buying the tariff story, Zoe, but what exactly is Trump's tariff plan?
Right. The numbers seem to get bigger and bigger as the campaign progresses towards Election Day. He now says he wants to impose 60% tariffs on Chinese goods, and then 10 to 20%, sort of a so-called universal tariff on all other goods. And as we heard, there was some pushback, some questioning, and in sort of Donald Trump fashion, then sort of took it out and saying, I didn't know, that this kind of conversation, that I was going to be interviewed in this way and actually, asked to dig into, I don't know, proposals and plans and what this economically would mean.
Anita, what are economists saying about the tariff plan, the stakes, the actual impact on the economy, on prices?
I think you heard the questioner sort of push back a little bit there on it. But basically what economists are saying, that this actually amounts to a tax on American consumers, and it would make the economy less efficient, send inflation surging in the U.S. You heard inflation, or him talking about the cost, the questioner talking about the cost there. You saw that there were a group of economists who signed a letter expressing fear that the proposals would reignite inflation, their words. There's been a separate study done that predicted the policies would cause inflation to jump as much as 9.3% in 2026, as opposed to the currently predicted 1.9%. So you can see what everybody is saying that this would, or that a lot of economists are saying that this would raise the cost of goods in the United States, and it would actually have Americans pay the cost, as opposed to what Trump is saying, which is others, right? Other countries.
Well, meanwhile, elsewhere on the presidential campaign, after he was in Chicago, or maybe it was on Monday. It was before. So many events. This radio host brain gets a little bit addled. On Monday, during Donald Trump's town hall in Pennsylvania, 2 attendees passed out due to medical issues. But then the rally turned from audience questions. There were only 3 or 4. After paramedics arrived, Donald Trump decided to turn on music and dance for nearly 40 minutes on stage instead of answering more questions. That was a spectacle that you can go and watch for yourself. Steve, what is the purpose of the increasing popularity of town halls at this stage of the campaign?
I think town halls, this kind of town hall that we saw, you can ask what the purpose was, feels like, and I mean no disrespect here, but a kind of like Southern Baptist church revival. Their adoration exercises, and that's what Donald Trump, he wants to be adored. He wants to be celebrated and loved, admired, and doesn't want to be challenged. In fact, he said at that forum, who wants to listen to questions anyway? Let's just listen to music.
That was the thing. He was like, I'm done with questions.
He was done with questions. He has no interest in questions. And he's basically saying, you don't have interest in questions either. This is all about me, adoring me. That's what these are. Most town halls are a moment for inquiry and thinking and back and forth discussion. And Donald Trump has been in a few of those, to give him credit, but not many.
Yes. What was interesting about that Pennsylvania town hall for me was the contrast with the Univision town hall, which was not about adoration, was not about heaping love on Donald Trump. It was about questions. And the audience members who posed those questions, including one construction, were tough questions. And the body language about the answers they got, I encourage you to go and check those out too. It was very telling and a substantive town hall. Very substantive. Rounding out the week's news with Anita Kumar, senior managing editor at Politico, Zoe Clark, political director at Michigan Public, and Steve Clemons, founding editor at the Washington Note. I'm Todd Zwillich. You're listening to 1A. Well, voting is already underway in lots of states. They're voting like droves in some places, and we're going to talk about it. But voting rules in some states are still being changed, even at this late date. In Nebraska this week, the Supreme Court ruled that convicted felons who've completed their sentences can vote in the upcoming election and in future ones. That ruling follows a political fight pitting the state attorney general and the secretary of state against the unicameral legislature in Nebraska. The state Supreme Court sided with bipartisan lawmakers. And just in time, too, voter registration in Nebraska ends next week. Meanwhile, in Georgia, they are rocking it. Early voting started on Tuesday, and voters cast more than 328,000 ballots, including absentee ballots, that were accepted on that day. It was by far a first-day record, more than double 2020, which held the previous record. But Georgia's a key state. The rules for how votes will be counted are also shifting there at the 11th hour. On Wednesday, a state judge halted several rules passed just a month ago by the Republican-controlled state election board, including one that would require county election officials to conduct an inquiry into election results before certifying them. There was another rule about hand counting ballots that was also struck down by a judge. Gabriel Sterling is the chief operating officer of the Georgia Secretary of State office.
I think it's not a bad idea in concept, but you need a lot of time and training to do it. Doing the last minute is a little more irresponsible than we'd like to see.
Well, the judge's ruling means that county election board members can't block the certification of votes based on whatever their suspicion of fraud or error might be. The Republican National Committee and Georgia Republican Party appealed that ruling on Thursday. Steve, how much of a rebuke are these court rulings to the Republican majority on that Georgia election board that I mentioned? I mean, they've been making a lot of changes last minute here that seem directed toward giving them the ability to hold things up after Tuesday.
I think it's a significant rebuke to a certain number of Republicans. I think we in the media are miscasting this as tension between Democrats and Republicans in Georgia. It's between Republicans and Republicans in Georgia. It was a Republican lawsuit that Judge Cox was responding to, not a Democratic lawsuit brought on the process to stop the Georgia State Election Board. So I think the last minute changes, and also I think when Judge Cox weighed in, he said particularly the issue related, to looking at investigations or finding some reason, reasonable inquiry is undefined, and that could be a loophole for virtually any way to stop the count, so to speak, and to kind of interrupt that election process. So I think it's a rebuke to short-term fixing of people trying to open loopholes to make Georgia a mess again down the road. But let's just be clear, it's not Democrats versus Republicans. You have different views on what responsible governance is in Georgia among Republicans who largely control that state.
And it's been that way all along.
Right.
I mean, Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State who got the call for
the
Donald
governor,
Trump,
Brian
Republican.
Kemp. Yeah.
Brian Kemp.
I mean, not to say that Brian Kemp has weighed in on this, but he is one who's been trying to be about responsible governance in that state.
All along. Also in Georgia, by the way, former President Jimmy Carter. Yes, he cast that early vote for Vice President Kamala Harris on Wednesday. Jimmy Carter, as we've said on this show, turned 100 on October 1st. Well, before we take a short break, a minute to remember a pioneer for women's equality. Lilly Ledbetter, former President Barack Obama paid tribute, saying Lilly did what so many Americans before her have done, setting her sights high for herself and even higher for her children and grandchildren. While working at a tire plant in Alabama, Lilly Ledbetter learned through an anonymous note in her locker that she was earning less pay than her male counterparts.
I go into work one evening and I look in my mail and here's this note. It has 4 names and it was the 3 men and myself. We had the same job, the lowest paid one. He had less education, less training, was younger. He was already making $600 plus more a month than I was.
Her fight for equal pay eventually led to the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act of 2009, which President Obama signed into law. Lilly Ledbetter died Saturday at the age of 86. More to come on the Roundup with Anita Kumar, Zoe Clark, and Steve Clemons, including a faux pas by a major city mayor. Wait for this one, baseball fans. I'm Todd Zwillick. You're listening to 1A. Coming up, reaction to the killing of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar. Also, will Israel abide by a new U.S. ultimatum? Either increase aid getting into Gaza or face an arms embargo. And what's in President Zelensky's victory plan for Ukraine? More on the Roundup. That's next hour on 1A.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from DuckDuckGo, a privacy company committed to raising the standard of trust online. Used by tens of millions, they work to help people search privately and avoid trackers. DuckDuckGo, privacy simplified. And from C3AI. C3AI software enables organizations to use artificial intelligence at enterprise scale, solving previously unsolvable problems. C3AI. This is Enterprise AI.
Welcome back to 1A. I'm Todd Zwillig. Back to our conversation in just a moment. But first, we'd love your help with an upcoming show. A study of Medicaid enrollees found the prevalence of autism in adults is twice as high as it was 15 years ago. And while some adults were diagnosed as kids, many also learned of their autism later in life. A new memoir describes that affirming experience for one author, and we'll talk to her next week. But we want to hear from you, too. If you've ever been diagnosed as neurodivergent as an adult, tell us your story. How did it change your life and life view? You can leave us a message, 855-236-1212. What happened before and after your own diagnosis? The number to call, 855-236-1A1A, or you can leave us a message with our app, 1A Vox Pop, and we'll get to your stories here on 1A. Let's get back to the Roundup now with Steve Clemons, Anita Kumar, and Zoe Clark of Michigan Public. And let's linger on Michigan and the public, Zoe. We were talking about Georgia and the early vote. Early voting starts Saturday, where you are. Absentee voting has already begun statewide. What are you watching for in your state as the process gets going here?
Yeah, so we should say that this is completely new for Michigan, this presidential election, to have this type of in-person early voting. This is something that voters approved to be put in the state constitution 2 years ago. So early voting only starts in Detroit tomorrow, but then there is a minimum of 9 days of early voting that has to happen statewide. And so we're looking at absentee ballot returns. Nearly 1 million ballots have already been returned. And tomorrow, Kamala Harris is going to be in Detroit on the first day of early voting. And so much like we were talking about Georgia earlier and seeing lines and seeing what turnout looks like in Wayne County, the most populous county in Michigan, where Detroit is located, we are going to really be starting to look at what turnout looks like and what that enthusiasm level looks like, because as we were talking about, that's going to sort of portend for what enthusiasm looks like for at least the Democratic side of the ticket.
Anita, enthusiasm certainly in Georgia is through the roof just based on early voting. Lots of people lining up, lots of people sending in ballots. We're watching Michigan. Everybody's watching registration and ballot requests in Pennsylvania. What are you seeing in the early vote trends as the early parts of early voting get going here?
Yeah, we always try to guess what that means, right? So it depends on what state and what district and what else is on the ballot. I mean, I do see that people are, as you indicated, they are early voting, but we have this really push and pull in the Republican Party, right? Because there are a lot of Republicans that are skeptical of early voting or mailing their ballot, all that sort of stuff. They want to go on election day. You've heard them say that over and over around the country in different places, and then you've seen Donald Trump say that he didn't trust it, that he thinks people should go in person, all that sort of stuff. And then they're also urging people to vote early. So it's a very confusing message out of the Republican Party. And I'm sort of focused on, and we had this situation last time, except that it was COVID. So it was a whole different ballgame then. I'm sort of looking at this, how, of course, we won't know this for 2 weeks, but how does this hurt or help the Republican Party? They've had a contradictory sort of message on this voting before Election Day. And we will see sort of what that ends up looking like. Should they have had this concrete, simple message about it? And what does this contradictory message do for them?
Often early vote numbers are gauged as a sign of Democratic enthusiasm, but also don't sleep on Election Day. If we're doing it right, every vote counts the same, whether it's cast early or on Election Day. So wait and see. But we try to look at those trends for enthusiasm measures as well. One more election story before we go. U.S. officials revealed that ISIS-K, the Afghan branch of the Islamic State, was behind an Afghan man's Election Day terrorist plot. He was arrested by the FBI last week in Oklahoma on accusations of planning a shooting on Election Day targeting large groups of people. Steve, what do we know about this alleged plot?
Well, we know that this young 27-year-old Afghan national, Nasir Ahmad Tahedi, has been accused of wanting to engineer a mass casualty incident on Election Day. He's from Oklahoma City. And he seemed very determined, according to the filings on this, to buy the AK-47s, to buy ammunition. He bought his wife and child one-way tickets out of the country. They've put together a case on him. But I think what's more chilling are the statements of FBI Director Christopher Wray, who said when he looks at this dashboard of threats, he's never seen it higher on potential threats inside the United States as we get closer to the election. So we don't know if this is a one-off moment where ISIS-K, which is ISIS Khorasan, which the United States is frankly still at war with. We not too long ago bombed a camp in Syria that was an ISIS Khorasan camp. We know there are ISIS Khorasan activities inside Afghanistan. And so we have an ongoing battle with the vestiges of terror groups we were dealing with before.
You mentioned the dashboard of threats, though, within the United States, combining both foreign-based threats
and U.S. domestic threats.
And U.S. homegrown threats.
That's right. Homegrown threats right here in the United States is very much on Christopher Wray's dashboard, and it's something that I think that threat level and concern which the FBI is watching is not just Afghan nationals from abroad, it's people here in this country.
And they have warned of it publicly. All right, that's the campaign, and boy, did we spent the right amount of time, because it is the story in America right now, but so is the economy. Things are looking pretty good for Wall Street right now. The S&P 500 and the Dow closed with record highs on Monday, and the S&P hit a new record on Thursday. Technology stocks with a particular focus on semiconductor chips were a major driver for those boosts. And on Wednesday, the price of oil fell to a 2-week low. That comes after the Washington Post reported that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told President Joe Biden that Israel would not strike nuclear or oil targets in Iran. It all sounds like good news, Steve. What does it mean for consumers?
Couple of different things, both positive and negative. On the near term positive, oil going down is very good in terms of deflating inflation, of really bringing prices down. That can have a very positive impact on the pocketbook.
Household prices.
Economics, right?
Yeah.
So that's there. The stock market has nothing to do with inflation. It has to do with a kind of combined future expectations of what you think are going on. You know, it's an interesting thing that if you look at the betting markets on Kamala Harris versus Trump, on the same day that the market began to surge recently, there was also this surge in Donald Trump's likelihood, according to these betting markets, that he was going to win. And I think a lot of the industry sees, well, if Donald Trump wins, maybe taxes will be kept low. You're not going to have tax increases. So there could be a lot of things. You've got to be careful correlating what these means. But also the low prices in oil could also mean China's output expected to be low. Other parts of global growth may be low, because that can be a worrisome sign down the road that maybe there are some warning signs even for the U.S. economy about slowdowns that we haven't really fully dealt with.
We covered inflation and wages and grocery prices and the personal economy of many, many Americans earlier this week on the show with the Washington Post's Heather Long. Do check it out. It's at the1a.org. Her analysis on how our actual pocketbooks are doing, not Wall Street's pocketbooks, but our very own heading into this election. Well, in some less good economic news, it sounds like Walgreens announced it's closing 1,200 stores. This comes as CVS and Rite Aid also closed down hundreds of stores across the country. Zoe, what reasons did Walgreens give for so many closures?
Right. It's about 13% of stores. One is like sales declining, right? At actual stores, competition from online shopping like Amazon. And as we're talking about, the prices of goods having increased, although stabilizing somewhat, folks still see high prices, and then budgeting happens. But it's also a deeper conversation about drug reimbursement rates. That could be a whole nother one show just about that. But it's what we're seeing, of course, not just pharmacies, but big box stores too. Sears, Kmart, Big Lots. Of course, a fan favorite, Red Lobster, made viral headlines over the summer. But what we're seeing is this real shift that's continued over the past decade when we're talking about purchases online, coupled with things just being more expensive.
Well, this story is near and dear to me. Listen to this one. If you've ever had to jump through hoops to cancel a subscription or a membership, your moment has come with the Federal Trade Commission. On Wednesday, the FTC announced a click-to-cancel rule, meaning businesses, gyms, and retailers have to make canceling a subscription as easy as signing up. I don't know if I want to name the gym, Steve. This, man, I hate this. I signed up for...
I can't name my gym?
Well, one of the most notorious gyms who does this, they're Planet Fitness. Look, everybody's been talking about Planet Fitness in context to like, it's really easy to sign up.
To be fair, it's almost every gym.
Sure. This is a business model for gyms. They make it really, really hard to get out of it, no matter how much they advertise the low price to get in.
I mean, I have a gym around the corner, and I think I've joined and quit about a dozen times.
Well, that's on you.
So easy to join. But when I quit and I come in and say, hey, I'm not even going.
So how does the rule work?
It takes a while. It takes a couple of months. You have to go in. You've got to talk. But it's not just gyms. I mean, I don't want to talk about another, a radio network that's on everyone's, car. But when you go and try and quit that subscription, you have to go through basically an interrogation with their team as to why you're going to quit, what you're doing, if you'd be interested in another deal. It's extremely difficult. And so what the FTC has done is it basically said you can quit by the way you joined. If you join something online, you're going to be able to quit easily with one click online, and it doesn't matter what platform that is, from a gym to a radio subscription.
Well, finally, some exciting news from space on 1A this week.
Ignition and liftoff. Liftoff of Falcon Heavy with Europa Clipper, unveiling the mysteries of an enormous ocean lurking beneath the icy crust of Jupiter's moon, Europa.
On Monday, the Europa Clipper, NASA's biggest interplanetary spacecraft, launched into space. The robotic probe will take about a 5.5-year journey to reach Jupiter's moon, Europa. You heard all about it here on 1A earlier in this week. Get it at the1a.org. Zoe, you have just a couple of seconds. Life on Europa? We're taking bets.
Oh my God, Todd. Like, you're asking me, are there other like life on planets and moons and other universes?
Yeah, that's why we hired you.
Why don't you just ask me, like, what's the meaning of life? Why are we here? Todd Zwarlick, what does it all mean? I will quote the project scientist for the Clipper who just said, quote, I think Europa is certainly the most likely place for life beyond Earth in our solar system. But that is as far as I'm going in terms of betting.
Why should we go further than that? That's Zoe Clark, political director at Michigan Public. Steve Clemons is here, founding editor at the Washington Note, and Anita Kumar, senior managing editor at Politico. I'm Todd Zwarlick. You're listening to 1A. Well, before we wrap up, quick look at sports. If you're a New Yorker, this has been a pretty good baseball season. The Mets, not doing so great. The Yankees, they lost last night. Could it be a Subway Series? It's still possible. The LA Dodgers are now one game away from making sure that does not happen. Scored a lot of runs last night. But on social media, images of Mayor Eric Adams of New York on Fifth Avenue during the Columbus Day Parade have been going all around. And he's sporting a cap with both of his city's teams on the front of the cap. As one New York Times writer put it, if there's no crying in baseball to Mr. Adams, there's apparently no picking sides either. And that's
when you thought the hole couldn't be dug deeper.
Yeah. That might be a worse offense to New Yorkers than the corruption he's accused of. We have a few minutes left, and we want to make sure we get inside the notebooks and inside the brains of our expert panel here with the Reporter's Notebook. Let's go around it. Anita, you can go first. We can have a little chat about what stories you think are most important coming up this week, what you're watching for, and what's in your notebook. Go ahead.
Okay, well, this is going to be counterintuitive. I'm telling you now. Even though we're 2 weeks from the election, I'm actually thinking about the transition. And I know that sounds a little bit weird, but I will tell you that for a long time now, weeks, both the Trump and Harris teams have separate teams that are working on what a transition might look like. And you can learn a lot about the candidates and what they're thinking. They're plotting out who might be in whatever role. They're deciding whether to take federal money to do this transition. And there's a lot happening behind the scenes that it just doesn't come to the radar because we're all focused on the election. And I think we're going to see some reporting on that and hear some things about that. And I think one thing that you're hearing right now is that Donald Trump, true to him, his form really, is saying, look, I'm not going to work with the federal government right now to take resources for a transition. What does that mean? Is he going to be ready if he's elected? Is Harris going to be ready? So that's what I'm thinking.
Also might mean he doesn't want a lot of people knowing about what the plans are for post-transition. That's fascinating. Zoe Clark, what's in your notebook?
So we've got Barack Obama, the former president, notably one of the most popular Democrats. Sometimes I think it might actually be Michelle Obama. But we've got Barack Obama coming to Michigan. Again, we're talking about GOTV, get out the vote. And what I'm really curious about is we spent a lot of time this hour talking about sort of this vibe shift of Harris talking yet again about the sort of scary side of Trump, right? The sort of you have to watch out for democracy. But let's not forget, the Tim Walz, they're just plain weird dynamic that got a lot of folks excited. And let's not forget the DNC when Obama made a rally-sized joke. And I'm curious to see, are we going to see this 1-2 punch, right, where the Harris campaign is now going to dig down to sort of the threat within from Trump? But will we start to see these high-powered surrogates come out and just make fun of the guy again? And so I'm really going to be interested in that message. And then can I add one more thing, though?
Quickly.
I'm going to be really quick. The universe. You were talking about the universe. I just want to remind folks, yes, we are in an election. It is insane. But look up, there was a super Hunter moon last night. We've got a comet in the sky. The Aurora Borealis was in Michigan last week. We are part of something much bigger. And I just want to remind people to also just take a breath in these final 17 days. We're all going to be okay. We're going to be okay.
The universe keeps smiling. Steve.
Well, speaking of bigger, I'm really interested in what the world is thinking about the U.S. election. And we have 2 really interesting meetings next week. One at the IMF, World Bank here in Washington have their fall meetings, global economic leaders, and they're all worried about which direction America is going on things we're discussing, like tariffs, trade, finance. And also, Vladimir Putin is hosting the BRICS summit, Brazil, Russia, India, China. I want to know what they're saying about Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. And that'll be happening in Moscow this next week, too. So 2 big global meetings, and I think we're going to be the big topic here in America.
Keep one eye on the universe and one eye on the rest of planet Earth. We'll leave you with that. That's Steve Clemons, founding editor at the Washington Note, Anita Kumar, senior managing editor at Politico, and the incomparable Zoe Clark, political director at Michigan Public and host of It's Just Politics. Guys, thank you so much. As always, Mike Kidd is 1A sound designer and engineer. Barbangiano produces our podcast, which is a great way to catch up on our best guests and conversations. Chris Castano is our digital editor. This program comes to you from WAMU, part of American University in Washington. It's distributed by NPR. I'm Todd Zwillick. Have a great weekend. Jen White will be back with you and with me for our weekly If You Can Keep It political segment on Monday. We'll see you then. This is 1A.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Capital One, offering Capital One Shopping, a downloadable browser extension that searches various sites for shoppers. What's in your wallet? More at CapitalOneShopping.com. From Noom, a personalized program based in psychology to help people understand their motivations, change their habits, and lead healthier lives. Learn more at Noom, Noom.com. And from the listeners who support this NPR station.
Artificial intelligence promises to upend many facets of our lives, including politics. Currently, there are few regulations to keep AI in check ahead of the 2024 presidential election. How is this transformative power being used? From bot armies to memes, we look at how AI is influencing our democracy. Next time on 1A.
This is a PT production.
The architect of October 7th, the man who refused to consider any peace deal with Israel, is dead. Now what? From WAMU and NPR in Washington, this is 1A. Hi, I'm Todd Zwillick. He was Israel's prime target, hunted for more than a year. Yahya Sinwar spent much of his time hiding in the tunnels underneath the Gaza Strip, but it appears the Hamas leader met his end in a chance encounter with an Israeli patrol. His final moments were caught by a drone camera. We'll consider what Sinwar's death means for the war and for the Middle East. Ukraine's president has presented what he calls a victory plan to Parliament. Canada's relations with India go from bad to worse. And here in D.C., panda lovers just saw their lives go from good to better. More after these headlines. I'm Todd Zwillich, and it's the International News Roundup. We have so much to talk about this week, not least the reaction to the death of Hamas's leader Yahya Sinwar. President Joe Biden called it a good day. Iran, the country that backs Hamas, said Sinwar's death would strengthen the spirit of resistance. And Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, said the killing of the Hamas chief was, quote, the beginning of the end of the war in Gaza.
This war can end tomorrow. It can end if Hamas lays down its arms and returns our hostages. Israel is committed to doing everything in our power to bring all of them home. Together, we can push back the forces of darkness and create a future of light and hope for all of us.
That's right where we're going to start with our great panel this week. Joining us from Kyiv, Ukraine, national security reporter Jack Detsch. Jack, as always, great to have you.
Good to be here, Todd.
Here in the studio, NPR national security correspondent Greg Myre. Great to see you, Greg.
Hi, Todd.
And Indira Lakshmanan, ideas and opinion editor, U.S. News and World Report. You know the voice. Hi, Indira.
Hi, Todd. Great to be here.
Great to have all of you here with us. Well, let's start with what we just heard there. Major development news that the architect of the October 7th attack last year is now dead. Israel did confirm the death of Yahya Sinwar, leader of Hamas, on Thursday. A statement from President Biden said, in part, this is a good day for Israel, for the United States, and for the world. Greg, how important was Sinwar? How could his death impact what we expect to see next?
Well, he was very important for several reasons. As you noted, he was considered the mastermind of the October 7th attack, the deadliest single attack ever against Israel. He was considered to be running the ongoing war in Gaza as best as one could, from given the circumstances there. And he was also the political leader of Hamas in Gaza, a real hardliner. Decisions did not get made without his say-so. And according to Israel and the U.S., he was rejecting the various ceasefire proposals that were taking place. So he played all these different roles, which was somewhat unusual for Hamas. The group has very much had a collective leadership over the years. And when a leader has been killed, that was replaced by somebody else. But there was always 3 or 4 or 5 guys, internal, external, military wing, political wing, that all played important roles. Sinwar seemed to consolidate a lot of these roles and seemed to have unusually strong power compared to other Hamas leaders, and therefore it'll be tricky to see how they deal with his death.
Jack, just on the ground, the tactics here, kind of a remarkable story about how Sinwar was killed, not usually how these high-level strikes go, not at all. Can you quickly just tell us how he met his end?
No, I mean, he was killed by an Israeli patrolman, as far as we know. Sinwar was in a building in Rafah, in the southern portion of the area. He was found during what was a routine IDF operation, or was described by the IDF as such. They engaged in a firefight with many Hamas fighters. Sinwar just happened to be there. It's unclear exactly why. The IDF is still piecing through it, whether he was there permanently or just kind of passing through the area. But yeah, it's certainly a change from the signature strikes that we've seen from Israel over the summer. Of course, the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, Sinwar's predecessor, some of the Hezbollah commanders that were killed over the summer, and then, of course, the strike that took out Hassan Nasrallah last month. Now you just see it in infantry fighting here.
Yeah, just remarkable, really, that an Israeli patrol seemed to have happened upon him by happenstance, and he got killed in combat, not at all like the other strikes that you mentioned. Well, Vice President Kamala Harris gave her reaction to the news on Thursday.
This moment gives us an opportunity to finally end the war in Gaza. And it must end such that Israel is secure, the hostages are released, the suffering in Gaza ends, and the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, security, freedom, and self-determination. And it is time for the day after to begin without Hamas in power.
Talk about the day after a little bit, Indira. Who speaks for Hamas now?
Well, we don't know yet, but the obvious candidate would be the political leader the former Hamas political bureau leader Khaled Mashal, who lives in Qatar and is one of the people who Yahya Sinwar and other hardliners in Hamas referred to as the hotel guys, because they hang out in hotels in Doha and try to negotiate settlements. So he would be the obvious choice. Another possibility is the younger brother of Yahya Sinwar, Mohammed, who also was a deputy military leader. I think the real question, though, is going to be who has the guns and who has the money on the ground. And right now, what we know in Gaza is that it's become almost like Mogadishu on the Mediterranean. One expert who we interviewed yesterday, Brian Katulis from the Mideast Institute, referred to it as that. It's a Somalia-like situation where gangs and disparate groups control the hostages, control the money, control the arms. So it's not necessarily so centralized anymore. I do think that there are a lot of Palestinians who are not shedding any tears for Sinwar because they blame him for having essentially declared martyrdom for all of Gaza. So it'll be interesting to see what happens next and who could negotiate on their behalf.
Declared martyrdom for all of Gaza and essentially
Correct.
Stood behind those civilians.
Correct.
Right, as the bullets and bombs rained down on them. Well, there's clearly an effort in Washington since Thursday, and some officials quoted in Israel, to use Sinwar's death as an opening for a deal that finally frees hostages held by Hamas and ends Israel's war in Gaza. You can feel the desire, Greg, among pretty much everyone around this. Like this is the time to declare victory. This is the opening. Things can change now. I get the desire. Is that real?
Too early to tell, Todd. So, of course, this seems to be the natural response, as so many people want to see this fighting ended. However, let me just play a little bit of a contrarian here. Hamas has already issued a statement when they acknowledging Sinwar's death, but saying we will continue, not suggesting they'll be doing anything different. Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli leader, has always said he wants to completely destroy Hamas. He and other hardliners in his cabinet may be thinking we've got them weaker than they've ever been before. Now is the time to really push ahead. So you can see an alternative where the Israelis may even step up things and try to put even more pressure on Hamas.
We got this comment from Will. The war criminal Yahya Sinwar got exactly what he deserved. Now we have to stop Netanyahu and his cabinet from continuing to commit war crimes. Well, Jack, you mentioned just a moment ago, the IDF has now killed the political leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, the architect of October 7th, and its leader in Gaza, Sinwar, also leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, and scores of other Hezbollah militants and senior lieutenants in the Hezbollah organization. Greg just mentioned it. Benjamin Netanyahu has talked for months about what he calls the need for total victory. Is this what total victory looks like? Do we know, Greg? Jack?
It's not entirely clear, Todd. I mean, dating back to Netanyahu's address to a joint session of Congress back in July, we heard him talk about total victory, especially in relationship to the Gaza war. So that's been kind of the classic taking Hamas apart limb from limb, taking apart their rule in Gaza, and then bringing the hostages home and trying to thread the needle there. Netanyahu hasn't really parsed the details about trying to destroy and defeat Hezbollah in Lebanon to that degree. And of course, we don't have as many Israeli troops in Lebanon, so we may continue to see these signature strikes to degrade the Hezbollah institutions while there's that small incursion underway.
Well, what Sinwar's death does not change is the humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip. That's where more than 40% of people face catastrophic levels of hunger in the coming months. That's according to a report from a global authority on food security released on Thursday. Jonathan Fowler, a spokesman for UNRWA, the UN agency overseeing the distribution of humanitarian aid in Gaza, told NPR, quote, "The situation in North Gaza is like a catastrophe within a series of catastrophes." And on Wednesday came this warning from United States Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield, who addressed the United Nations Security Council.
A quote-unquote policy of starvation in northern Gaza would be horrific and unacceptable. The government of Israel has said that this is not their policy, that food and other essential supplies will not be cut off. And we will be watching to see that Israel's actions on the ground match this statement.
There is international law concerning deliberate starvation. It's called the Rome Statute. It's the founding treaty of the International Criminal Court regarding deliberate starvation as a crime against humanity. Indira, what concerns does Israel seem to have that its policy toward Gaza violates this law?
Well, look, this isn't a new complaint that has come up. It was already this past June that the UN Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the occupied Palestinian territory issued a report in which they investigated the aftermath of October 7th. And they said that they, asserted that Israeli authorities were responsible for starvation as a method of warfare, along with a number of other things. You're right in saying that this is a violation of the Rome Statute, but remember, neither the U.S. nor Israel are parties to the Rome Statute. Neither of them signed it, and you can't prosecute a state. The ICC can only prosecute individuals, and very controversially, it has tried to, it's put out warrants for both the head of Israel and the heads of terrorist groups.
All of that is true, and none of it changes the ethics of what the law is trying to uphold. Much more to come after a break. National security reporter Jack Detsch is here, NPR's Greg Myre, and Indira Lakshmanan, ideas and opinion editor at U.S. News and World Report. Lots more to get to coming up. More about a possible U.S. arms embargo and how Israel is responding to the U.S. ultimatum. We'll also hear about a victory plan presented to Ukraine's parliament this week in Kyiv. I'm Todd Zwillich, and it's the Friday News Roundup on 1A.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Procter & Gamble, maker of Nervive Nerve Relief. Nervive is designed to reduce occasional nerve aches, weakness, and discomfort in hands or feet. Learn more at nervivehealth.com. From Angie, committed to helping homeowners find and hire local pros for a variety of home projects. Homeowners can see upfront pricing and book appointments through the Angie app or on Angie.com. And from the listeners who support this NPR station.
Welcome back. I'm Todd Zwillich. It's the International News Roundup with NPR National Security Correspondent Greg Myre, Indira Lakshmanan, Ideas and Opinion Editor at U.S. News and World Report, and Greg, and Jack Detsch, pardon me, joining us from Kyiv. Jack is usually here in studio, and he's away from us today, so we're not used to having him on the phone, but we're glad he's here. He's in Kyiv. Jack, thanks for being here as well. Jack, before the break, we were talking about the death of Sinwar, also the humanitarian outrage in Gaza, and the ultimatum, essentially, both in the statement that we heard from the United States ambassador to the UN and in a letter from the United States to Israel this week, essentially saying, let aid into Gaza, let food into Gaza, or face a possible arms embargo. What more do we know about the ultimatum and whether Israel will respond?
Right. This was Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and Secretary of State Tony Blinken sending a letter directly to the Israelis, warning them that if the situation doesn't improve within the next 30 days and they don't see aid flowing in, they could cut off weapons to the Israelis. But we're hearing some sort of doublespeak from the administration, the public line that's coming out through that channel, and then behind closed doors. Politico has an interesting report this week that one of the Biden administration's top humanitarian envoys has basically messaged to aid groups in the past couple of months that Israel's too close of an ally to actually begin suspending arms, despite what it's done in Gaza to restrict aid. So there may be some other pressure valve that the administration could pull. It could try and sort of arm wrestle the Israelis into allowing more life-saving aid into Gaza. But it seems unlikely that this letter is going to be backed up with a full promise to actually suspend the weapons if Israel doesn't go ahead and let more aid in.
Well, another front in Israel's fights, the northern border. The Israeli military carried out airstrikes early Wednesday in Hezbollah-dominated areas in southern Lebanon and outside Beirut. The strikes hit municipal buildings in Nabatea, killing at least 16, including the city's mayor, and injuring more than 50, according to Lebanese officials. Here, Lebanese nationals who are currently living in the United States will now be eligible for TPS, temporary protected status. That announcement came from the Department of Homeland Security on Thursday. Jack, help us understand the role of the United Nations interim force in Lebanon. It was established in 1978 by the UN Security Council. Benjamin Netanyahu has told these peacekeepers to, quote, get out of harm's way. What's been UNIFIL's response?
That's right. UNIFIL has about 10,000 peacekeepers from 50 countries, many of them patrolling areas that Hezbollah is in, that Israel is targeting in its ground incursion. It's about a 410-mile square area along the border. So that's where the two sides really come into conflict because, of course, these are areas Israel is directly targeting. Now, we've seen it in the past couple of weeks and even in the past couple of days, UN peacekeepers being fired upon in southern Lebanon, UNIFIL saying these are deliberate attacks, one that damaged a watchtower, other uses of chemical gases that have left some of the personnel with skin irritation and gastrointestinal issues. So this is going to continue to be a back and forth fight. But right now, we don't see the UNIFIL countries, 50 of them and 40 of them that are actually messaging this publicly, backing down at this point. This includes a diverse array of countries. You go from Ghana and Nepal to France and China that are putting their names on these letters.
Well, following the 2006 Israel-Lebanon war, the UN Security Council adopted a resolution mandating the creation of a demilitarized zone south of Lebanon's Litani River and entrusted UNIFIL to oversee Hezbollah's disarmament and withdraw from the area. Greg Myre, did that ever happen?
No, it really didn't. I covered that 2006 war, and we had the same issue we had today where UNIFIL was in the area and at risk itself. And so after that war, the UN Security Council resolution called for Hezbollah to move north of the Litani River. It runs east-west about 12 miles north of the Israel-Lebanon border. And again, Hezbollah is not a state army. It's a militia. And the resolution allowed the Lebanese army to be near the border, but not Hezbollah. It just never really happened. Hezbollah was immediately back in the southern parts of Lebanon with weapons, digging tunnels, and many have been warning for years and years this was building up towards another war, and now we see it happening.
Well, Jack Detsch mentioned the ultimatum that came from the United States to Israel this week and warned us not to have very high expectations for that ultimatum. But on Tuesday, the U.S. said, indeed, it would cut off arms shipments to Israel unless it allows more aid into Gaza. U.S. officials told reporters that this was, quote, not a threat. But State Department spokesman Matt Miller made it clear any failure to meet this demand would have consequences.
We know that it's possible to get humanitarian assistance into Gaza. We know it can be done. We know that the various logistical and bureaucratic obstacles can be surmounted. And so it is incumbent upon the government of Israel to surmount those challenges and get assistance in.
That's the State Department saying, no, you should take the ultimatum seriously. Jack Detsch has reporting suggesting the world community might not be taking it so seriously in the end, but the U.S. is by far the biggest supplier of arms to Israel. According to one estimate from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, the U.S. accounted for 69% of Israel's imports of major conventional arms between 2019 and 2023. But Indira, Germany is the next biggest arms exporter to Israel. What concerns did we hear from Berlin this week?
Right. There was a recent report in the German tabloid Bild that said that Germany had actually blocked the sale of weapons to Israel. Germany has denied that, and they said that actually there is no arms embargo. But we do know that certain members of the government, certain German politicians are very concerned about the same issue of humanitarian aid getting in. And in the same way that the U.S. has given this 30-day deadline boost aid to Gaza or risk a cut in military support, the Germans are also concerned about getting more aid in. We know that the death toll in the Gaza Strip is over 42,000 now. The head of UNICEF was just there in Gaza and came back with really dire reports of the situations in all the hospitals. So, yes, the Germans have approved just this year more than 14 million euros worth of arms exports. But they are concerned about the humanitarian issue. And I think it's something that they want to be cautious about because of legal challenges as well. And this is, something that has reverberated throughout Europe. The French president last week called for a halt to deliveries of weapons to be used in Gaza. The Spanish prime minister also called a halt. The UK suspended some arms sales to Israel. So, this is all coming. Let's not forget, though, at the same time that the U.S. has sent this really important weapons system to Israel along with 100 U.S. troops to operate it.
And we want to talk a little bit more about that weapons system. There are the weapons that Israel is using in its war in Gaza. There are purely defensive weapons that Israel uses to defend itself against very real aggression from places like Iran and medium-range, long-range ballistic missiles. So on Sunday, the Pentagon said the U.S. had agreed, as Indira said, to send its advanced anti-missile defense system to Israel. Officials confirmed that the U.S. is also sending soldiers to operate that system. Jack, this is called the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, otherwise known as THAAD. What is it? What does it do?
Yeah, right. Definitely a mouthful of Pentagon jargon there to put it together. But THAAD is an interesting system and differs from the Patriot system that's been given to the Ukrainians in that it doesn't actually have a warhead. It relies on just an intercept strictly by contact with the incoming missile. Fairly similar in terms of the ability to intercept weapon systems and intercept ballistic missiles, but it's potentially a more advanced system, a newer system, just had its first intercept a couple of years ago. So this is, of course, a strong signal of support and definitely a signal that the U.S. is going to be supportive of future intercepts of Iranian ballistic missiles, just as we saw in October and back in April on behalf of the Israelis, especially in the air defense campaign.
But Jack, you're speaking to us from Kyiv. And you mentioned that Ukraine does have some American anti-missile systems, but they don't have THAAD. So how did this decision to send it to Israel go down in Ukraine?
It's interesting. There's a lot of political mechanizing. So the United States, Israel, and Ukraine have been working on backfilling some of the Patriot systems that Ukraine hasn't gotten. They've been looking to get up to 7, potentially up to 25, although that's sort of a pie-in-the-sky estimate that Zelensky and other Ukrainian officials have put out there. So there's frustration, of course, that you don't see the level of support, the Americans being directly involved in these missile intercepts that occur over Israel. The Ukrainians have been asking for more allied help, whether it's from Poland or Romania, that could intercept from over the NATO border on the eastern flank. It seems like this is a demand they're going to continue to push, and yeah, it's another sign from Kyiv, and the feeling in Kyiv here is that they're not on equal footing when it comes to the defensive support that they're being promised versus the Israelis.
Greg Myre, how do you read the deployment of THAAD in Israel from the United States now? We're going to talk in a moment about impending retaliatory strikes on Iran that we think are coming. The United States is trying to encourage Israel not to go full hog on a retaliation. Does giving them THAAD kind of say, look, you don't have to go as hard as maybe you want to. We're giving you defenses. This is part of the inducement.
Clearly, it's there to help Israel, but I think it's also very much sending a signal to Iran. You've fired 2 big rounds of ballistic missiles at Israel, once in April and then again on October 1st. No Israelis have been killed. Damage has been limited. Now we're really the U.S. is sending this top-of-the-line system to protect. Also, the U.S. had some B-2 bombers that struck in Yemen against underground sites. So we're seeing a stepped-up U.S. presence with really high-end technology, signaling both, I think, to Yemen, to Iran. We have assets that we can use still. Be prepared to deal with them.
That's Greg Myre from NPR. Indira Lakshmanan is here from U.S. News and World Report, and on the line from Kyiv, national security reporter Jack Detsch. I'm Todd Zwillich. You're listening to 1A. Well, as we mentioned earlier this week, CNN was the first to report that the United States now does expect Israel to retaliate against this month's Iranian attack before Election Day here in the United States. The timeline and parameters of Israel's retaliation against Iran have been the subject of intense debate. Donald Trump's former national security advisor, Ambassador John Bolton, says the time to go after Iran is now.
To put it this way, I think Iran is scared to death of Bibi Netanyahu and the Israeli government. I don't think they're scared of the Biden administration. And yeah, sure, you can say Iran doesn't want a regional war, but it launched one against Israel last October the 7th. It's not going very well, so now they're really worried. I think that's the point where Israel can have the maximum impact precisely by going after the nuclear weapons program. There's no guarantee they'll have another opportunity as good.
Greg, we know that President Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu spoke for the first time in months recently. How much do we know about what information is being shared by both sides regarding this expected retaliation against Iran, imminent, or so it appears?
Right. So NPR has spoken with some officials who are familiar with this matter, and they say, yes, Israel is planning to respond to this October 1st ballistic missile attack by Iran. But Israel is signaling that it will be directed toward Iranian military facilities. Now, this could include things like the sites where Israel launches those missiles. But Israel is also saying it's not planning to go after Iran's oil or nuclear facilities. An attack on either of those would be seen as much more likely to lead to escalation and additional rounds of fighting. And then one last point, we're also hearing the response is almost certain to come before the U.S. election on November 5th. Israel doesn't want to wait longer than that.
So we've gotten a lot of signaling, Indira, about this impending attack. Netanyahu apparently has said he won't attack oil infrastructure. World oil prices seem to have reflected that announcement as well. Iran's nuclear facilities are well protected, but also on the board, clearly. Many people questioning whether Israel will go all the way and go after nuclear facilities. What other options are on the table? What options does Israel have here to retaliate?
Well, remember, the Israeli defense minister has said that this will be a precise, painful, and surprising attack. You're absolutely right that the Biden administration has said do not, under any circumstances, go after oil facilities because of the effect that will have on oil prices. And the last thing the Biden administration wants is high gas prices at the pump before November 5th, which always reverberates badly onto the incumbent, which means it would affect Vice President Harris. They've also said don't go after nuclear because that would draw the U.S. in and would cause a global war. So Israel could think about some limited targets like some important key oil rig or warship or radar site or a key command and control center. They could also try to deny Iran certain military capabilities. So they could target missile batteries, drone sites, submarines, airfields. They could also try to hit Iran where it hurts, monetarily, and missiles get replaced, airfields get rebuilt, radar sites get relocated. You could also hit an economic target. So, there's the whole question of what would be an economic target that affects capital flows, jobs, imports, exports. So I think they have a whole array of options. They've already done targeted assassinations. As you've seen earlier this year, some of the to and fro between Iran and Israel has been quite targeted as a way to sort of limit the aftermath. Now, one question in political circles here in the U.S. is whether Netanyahu is trying to use this to help potentially Trump with some sort of October surprise for the election. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, and whether the timing of the retaliation goes exactly to that point. Lots more to come with our esteemed panel, national security reporter Jack Detsch, Indira Lakshmanan from U.S. News and World Report, and Greg Myre of NPR. Well, coming up, why relations between Canada and India have hit another all-time low. Plus, yes, the pandas are back. The National Zoo here in D.C. is restocking its supplies of bamboo, and it's so delicious. But as we break, news about something shiny and recently up for sale. Dame Shirley Bassey famously sang the title track for the Bond movie Diamonds Are Forever in 1971. Well, maybe not. Earlier this month at an auction in Paris, her jewelry collection smashed a world record. It sold for $2.4 million. The lots included a diamond necklace, a diamond ring given to her by Elton John. And the proceeds from the sale are going to Dame Shirley's charities of choice. I'm Todd Zwillich. 1A is forever.
Calling all emo kids, indie label Hopeless Records has landed at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
We're a home for geeks and freaks and weirdos and everyone who feels like they don't have a home. Hopeless and our community is that home.
I'm Juana Summers. If you're asking yourself, is emo still a thing? Yes, and we'll show you on the next All Things Considered from NPR News.
Support for NPR comes from the station and from Progressive Insurance, home of the Name Your Price tool, so drivers can see coverage options at Progressive.com or 1-800-PROGRESSIVE. Price and coverage match limited by state law. From Ooma, a cloud-based phone service for any size business, with an automated virtual receptionist, video meetings, and other features to connect to customers and coworkers anywhere at ooma.com/NPR. And from listeners like you who donate to this NPR station.
I'm Todd Zwillich. Welcome back. It's the weekly World News Roundup on 1A with NPR's Greg Myre, Indira Lakshmanan from U.S. News and World Report, and on the line from Kyiv, Ukraine, national security reporter Jack Detsch. We were talking before the break about options for striking Iran. Indira Lakshmanan mentioned that striking oil infrastructure would spike world oil prices at a time when the United States, or certainly the Biden administration, doesn't want that. But Jack, hitting oil and spiking oil prices benefits somebody else, Vladimir Putin and the petrostate of Russia. that he leads. On Wednesday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky presented a victory plan to that country's parliament. He told lawmakers that the plan could end the war with Russia by next year. What's in the plan?
There are 5 main points, Todd. So the first is an invitation to join NATO. The second is the desire to bring war further onto Russian soil, whether it's operations like Kursk or long-range strikes, removing the Ukrainian handcuffs on weapons like the ATACMS system. The third idea would be to try and have some semblance of non-nuclear deterrence. Ukraine is keeping a lot of that secret, but they're describing that as partially some capability that could go after the Russian war machine. That could be more Storm Shadows, more ATACMS, potentially Tomahawk cruise missiles, or something like the land cruise missiles that we see deployed in the rest of Europe. Ukraine's also looking at emphasizing its natural resources to rebuild its economy, and then looking at redeveloping its post-war security architecture, including putting more Ukrainian troops on the eastern flank to be commingled with NATO, potentially to teach them the lessons of the war, and also be further integrated into the alliance. So it's not a lot of new stuff here. We've seen a lot of this before, and certainly that's some of the criticism we're hearing from Western officials. This is a lot of the continual pushes from the Ukrainians for more arms, more lifting of restrictions. So we'll see if this flies any further, but certainly it's a response and a reading of the mood by Zelensky that there's not as much political will as there was in 2020, 2021, 2022. In the early days of the war, 2022 and beyond, I should say, to continue the fighting here.
Well, on the other side of that eastern front that you just mentioned, Russia reportedly creating a battalion of up to 3,000 soldiers from North Korea. Greg, if these reports are true, what does it tell us about the state of Russia's forces right now?
Yeah, I mean, every story involving North Korea comes with this weird twist of, I did not see that coming. So a couple quick points. I think the U.S. has not confirmed this. It's checking. It considers it a serious report, but hasn't confirmed it. The main source seems to be President Zelensky, who says these North Korean troops are coming to join the fight. Would still be a relatively small number, but a lot of symbolism here. You know, Russia in this war, in fact, probably in every Russian war, throws huge numbers of troops into the fight. They suffer massive casualties. Now, we know they've been able to do that so far by some unusual means. They take people out of their own prisons and send them to the front. They pay large bonuses to contract soldiers. But so far, they have been able to send large numbers of their own troops there. If these reports are true about the North Koreans, it suggests Russia may be having trouble in getting the number of troops they want to put into the fight. It also would speak to the growing ties. Russia's already getting artillery from North Korea, not considered to be good artillery, but artillery nonetheless. Drones from Iran. Zelensky is saying his country is now at war with 3 nations, Russia, North Korea, and Iran.
In terms of global politics or North Korea's posture, if you can call it that, I mean, yes, it's one thing to send artillery. If it's true, sending active duty combat troops into a war theater in a foreign country, that's like Vietnam. That's like American stuff. If North Korea is starting to execute this strategy, what does it mean for U.S. posture toward North Korea?
Well, already, you know, the U.S. Sanctions North Korea and isolates it to an extraordinary degree. I don't know how much more could be done, but it really does speak to this axis of Russia, North Korea, China, and Iran getting together in the war in Ukraine and on other issues. So it would reinforce that narrative, which keeps getting stronger.
Well, speaking of North Korea, the authoritarian country's state media claimed on Wednesday that 1.4 million citizens recently applied to join or return to the armed forces. That's allegedly in response to rising tensions with South Korea. Indira, catch us up. What's happened between North and South Korea recently?
So there are always tensions between North and South Korea, which, you know, to remind our listeners who might be younger, might not know, the Korean War between 1950 and 53 actually ended in an armistice, not in a peace treaty. So North and South Korea are still officially at war, are not officially in peace. In this last couple of weeks, Seoul has done some drone incursions, according to North Korea. North Korea has accused Seoul of sending drones over Pyongyang and scattering a huge number of anti-North leaflets. The North then blew up inter-Korean roads and rail lines on its side of the border. And, really this was interesting because in the DMZ, which everyone has heard of, the demilitarized zone, there are actually roads between the two countries. And now to have blown up those roads is a pretty huge step. Let's not forget that North Korea already has 1.3 million active soldiers, another 600,000 reservists. It's one of the biggest militaries in the whole world, even though the country itself is backwards. As you said, they're now sending people to Russia. One benefit to serve in Ukraine under the Russian flag, wearing Russian uniforms. One of the benefits for them is getting actually combat experience for their soldiers. But I've actually been to North Korea, and it is a very, very strange place. It is a totalitarian state where people are brainwashed. I've never seen it anywhere else in the world. It's beyond anything you would see in China or any other country that has an authoritarian communist government. So we're going to have to watch what happens, and it's not a good sign, obviously. North Korea has said now that there's no reunification with South Korea, so we should be worried, particularly when there's a new U.S. president, of what kind of provocations they might try.
Well, relations between India and Canada aren't as bad as relations between North and South Korea, but that doesn't mean that they're good at all. The dispute between Canada and India goes back over a year now to the death of Sikh activist Hardeep Singh Nijjar in Canada. The activist was considered a terrorist by the Indian government. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's administration has been investigating India's role in his assassination, allegations that India denies. But Prime Minister Trudeau testified at a hearing on foreign interference this week.
I have the names of a number of parliamentarians, former parliamentarians and or candidates in the Conservative Party of Canada who are engaged or at high risk of, or for whom there is clear intelligence around foreign interference.
Indira, Trudeau doesn't specifically mention India there. I will say those allegations from the Prime Minister were widely reported in the context of the ongoing escalation with India. What's behind these accusations of foreign interference?
Well, the Canadian police force has done a big investigation, and part of this, of course, is their allegations against Indian diplomats. As you mentioned, this week, Canada and India have expelled each other's top diplomats. Canada says it has evidence of the Indian government being involved in the killing of this Sikh activist who, although the Indians were calling him a terrorist, I think that's simply because he was advocating for a separatist Sikh homeland, which India sees as a threat to its territorial integrity. Khalistan is the idea of the Sikh independence movement. But in fact, I don't think he was ever accused of any kind of violence or anything like that. He was killed just in a parking lot after attending a Sikh temple.
Still, all of this is clearly escalating on the Canadian domestic scene. For the Prime Minister to come out and say what he said.
It is, and of course, the Prime Minister has accused a very prominent Conservative Party parliamentarian, the Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, of being involved because he's refused to get security clearance that is required to get briefed. So they want to know.
Basically, he doesn't want to know.
He doesn't want to know, or does he not want to be checked out? What's going on? And, there's also questions about the government of China targeting another conservative MP through the media. So it's, we've certainly faced situations in the United States where members of Congress have been targeted by various foreign governments who have tried to influence them. We know that Russia and China have certainly targeted people in the U.S. government. But this is something where Trudeau is laying his cards on the table and accusing his political opponents of being influenced by foreign governments.
Well, let's check in on Italy. just for a moment and the rollout of its plan to curb immigration. Italy's answer, send those migrants to Albania. This week, 16 migrants rescued at sea trying to reach Italy were vetted by the Italian Coast Guard and turned over to Italian authorities in Albania. Jack, what's going on?
Yeah, this was 10 people from Bangladesh, 6 from Egypt that disembarked. They'll be the first in the deal, which has generated significant controversy. And Italy's already has 2 centers open to handle these asylum seekers, maybe up to 36,000. But it's caused a lot of controversy among some EU states that are a little bit more liberal on immigration and rights groups who are saying this is something that might not comply with international law. Amnesty International calling this a cruel experiment and a stain on the Italian government. But Giorgia Meloni, the Italian prime minister right now, brushing aside those criticisms, saying this is a new path, the ability to chart a new course on immigration in the EU. So it seems like we're going to continue to see this type of approach within the bloc towards immigration. You've just seen a much stronger turn towards that tide recently.
That's Jack Detsch speaking with us from Kyiv, national security reporter. NPR's Greg Myre is here, and Indira Lakshmanan from U.S. News and World Report. I'm Todd Zwillich. You're listening to 1A. Well, speaking of Italy, also this week, Italy made it illegal for couples to go abroad to have a baby through surrogacy. The law expands on anti-surrogacy laws in Italy. Indira, what's the case for this change, and who does the law target?
It's basically targeting gay male couples. Let's just be honest about it. Even though we know that in Italy, 90% of the couples in Italy who rely on international surrogacy each year, an estimated 250 couples, are heterosexual, but same-sex couples are the ones you can easily target. If a heterosexual couple comes back from a trip abroad with a baby, who is to say that the woman didn't give birth to the child overseas? It's very hard to prove that. Whereas if 2 men come back who gave birth to this baby. So this is part of Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's conservative agenda. And, it's to me, it's an interesting parallel to in the U.S. conservatives trying to ban IVF. It hurts a lot of people who just want to have children.
Well, before we go, we have to check in on a very important story for International News Roundup listeners. You know where I'm going with this. The day has finally arrived. This week, 2 giant pandas made their way to Washington, D.C. 3-year-olds Bao Li and King Bao here on $1 million per year lease from China. They'll now call the National Zoo their home for the next 10 years. Now, I want you to know that before we went on the air, panelists were absolutely fighting each other to talk about the pandas. Greg Myre really, really wanted to get in on the pandas. He was rabid. He was dying to talk about this story. Indira Lakshmanan almost wrestled him to the ground because she really wanted to cover the pandas. Indira won that battle royale in the 1A octagon. So Indira.
It's just because Greg is such a gentleman.
How excited are we?
Well, I am always here for pandemonium. You know it. I'm here for it. I lived in China for 7 years. I love the pandas. I also am very cognizant that this is part of China's cultural diplomacy. When the pandas were taken away last October, there were so many tears shed here in Washington, but it was also about China asserting that it wasn't happy with the U.S. It's expensive to keep pandas. We pay $1 million a year for the conservation bill. Finland recently had to return pandas to China because they couldn't afford the high price. So, this is part of China's panda diplomacy, but that doesn't mean that we can't all enjoy the pandas here. And I personally am looking forward to the Panda Cam and returning there in person.
It all starts in January. Signs up all over D.C. The pandas are coming. Well, the pandas are here. Just a quick minute before we go, I want to get into your notebooks a little bit. Greg, I want to focus on you here because, well, as a consolation prize, you didn't get to talk, joking around with Greg. But Greg, what do you think, what's in your notebook about the story that might not be on our radar that we should be watching out for next week?
Yeah, I'm working on a story looking at humanitarian failures in the big wars that we're covering. I was in Israel in July, Ukraine in August. It struck me the Geneva Conventions marked 75 years in August, which really got this notion of protecting civilians in war going. all these UN organizations, private human rights and humanitarian groups, and yet we've seen them just not be able to do their job in the Middle East war, in the Russia-Ukraine war, in the Sudan war. So I spent some time looking at that and hope to get to that very soon.
And that story should be coming to your radio dial. Watch out for it, from Greg Myre, NPR's national security correspondent, who I want to thank for joining us in studio this hour, as well as Indira Lakshmanan, ideas and opinion editor at U.S. News and World Report, and from Kyiv, national security reporter and friend of the Roundup, Jack Detsch. Thank you all for joining us. If you love the Roundup, you'll love the Friday News Quiz. We need your answer to just one question posted at the1a.org. You can also find it on our app, 1A Vox Pop. Mike Kidd is our sound designer and engineer. Eileen Humphreys is the editor and producer of 1A On Demand. Matthew Simonson helps with the podcast and on-demand audio. AC Valdez is our senior supervising producer. Maya Garg is our senior managing producer, who brings together all of our great panelists and journalists every week. This program comes to you from WAMU, part of American University in Washington. It's distributed by NPR. I'm Todd Zwillich. I'm back with Jen on Monday for our weekly election series. If you can keep it, hope you'll join us then. Have a great weekend. This is 1A.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from the NPR Wine Club, bringing people wines inspired by NPR shows. Whether purchasing a few bottles or joining the club, every purchase supports NPR. Available to adults 21 or older. nprwineclub.org. From Indeed, designed to be an end-to-end hiring solution for businesses of all sizes to attract, interview, and hire candidates, all from one platform. Learn more at Indeed.com/NPR. And from the Doris Duke Foundation.
Imagine the joys of lying on your aunt's floor, your head in front of the stereo, just absorbing the music.
There was a thread. All the composers seemed to touch on earlier traditions and influences of their own.
Legendary solo artist and Doobie Brother, Michael McDonald, on the music that shaped his own. That's next time on 1A.
Coming up on the Politics Hour, we're running for office and we're debating all comers. In our first debate today, we're taking on Angela Alsobrooks, Democratic candidate for the U.S. Senate in Maryland. After we've defeated her, we'll move on to crush Virginia 7th District congressional candidate, Democrat Eugene Vindman. Then comes the real heavyweight, Initiative 83, D.C.'s ranked choice voting. Though not really a candidate, it's nevertheless controversial. So first, City Paper's Loose Lips Alex Comer will explain it. Then after making sure we understand it, we'll try to understand it some more. But that comes after we lose the debates. As always, it's why we keep coming back to the Politics Hour after the news.